Hello everyone. Let's jump straight into a distinction that is absolutely vital for your success as a risk management professional. The difference between a risk and an issue. When we look at the formal side of things, we define a risk as an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. Now, in plain English, a risk is a maybe. It's something that lives in the future. It's a question mark hanging over your head. Think of it like this. If you are planning a hike and you see dark clouds in the distance, rain is a risk. It hasn't started pouring yet, so it's still an uncertainty. You've probably seen this at the office when someone says, "We might lose our lead designer next month." That's a risk because it hasn't happened yet. I once had a project manager who treated everything like an emergency, and I told him, "Stay with me here. If it hasn't happened yet, it's a risk we can plan for, not a fire we have to jump into right now." It's all about the timing and the uncertainty. So, now that we've mastered the idea that a risk is a future maybe, you might be wondering how that changes the moment the first drop of rain actually hits your head. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is defining the issue. Now let's look at the other side of the fence. An issue is typically defined as a current condition or situation that is already impacting the project objectives. In our everyday classroom language, an issue is a now. It's a fact. It's a certainty. The maybe has turned into a definitely. Let's go back to our hike. The moment you feel water on your face and you are getting soaked, rain is no longer a risk. It is an issue. At work, if that lead designer actually walks into your office and hands in their resignation letter, you aren't managing a risk anymore. You are managing an issue. You can't use probability on the resignation letter that is sitting on your desk. I've seen teams waste hours trying to calculate the likelihood of something that already happened. Don't do that. If it's real and it's happening now, it's an issue. So now that we have mastered the difference between the future maybe of a risk and the current reality of an issue, you might be wondering how we actually keep track of these two very different animals. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the difference between the risk register and the issue log. Since risks and issues are different, we have to store them in different places. We use a risk register to track our uncertainties and an issue log to track our current problems. Think of it like this. The risk register is your early warning system, like a radar that shows planes coming towards you. The issue log is your repair list for the planes that are already on the ground with broken engines. Let's break this down together. You don't want to mix your might happens with your already happens because it confuses the team. I remember a project where the risk register was 50 pages long because they kept putting every broken printer and coffee machine in there. It made the real risks, the big future threats, impossible to see. You keep the register for the what ifs so you can prevent them, and you keep the log for the what nows so you can fix them. So now that we've mastered the idea of keeping our future worries separate from our current headaches, you might be wondering what actually happens when a risk grows up and becomes a reality. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the process of risk realization. Watch how this connects. When a risk actually occurs, we call that risk realization. At this exact moment, the item must be closed in the risk register and moved over to the issue log. It's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It changes its nature completely. In professional terms, this is when the probability of the risk becomes 100%. You've probably seen this at work. You had a risk that the hardware might be delayed. Suddenly, the vendor calls and says the truck broke down and they won't be there today. Boom! You close that risk, you open an issue, and you start your workaround. I once saw a team get stuck because they kept trying to mitigate a risk that had already happened. I told them, "You can't mitigate the past. It's an issue now, so let's talk about how to resolve it." So, now that we've mastered the transition from a realized risk into a live issue, you might be wondering who is actually responsible for making that call. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the role of the risk owner versus the issue owner. Let's take it a step deeper into the people side of things. Every risk has a risk owner whose job is to watch the horizon and prepare the defenses. But once that risk becomes an issue, we often need an issue owner who is a doer and can fix the problem. Sometimes they are the same person, but the mindset is different. The risk owner says, "How can I stop this from happening?" The issue owner says, "How can I fix this now that it has happened?" Think of it like a security guard versus a plumber. The security guard is there to make sure the pipes don't get vandalized. But if a pipe bursts and the basement is flooding, you don't need the guard to just watch it. You need someone to grab a wrench and stop the leak. At the office, your risk owner might be a senior architect, but your issue owner might be a project coordinator who is great at making phone calls to get things back on track. So now that we have mastered the difference in mindsets between watching for trouble and fixing trouble, you might be wondering how we plan for the money side of this. Well, that brings us right into our final step, which is the difference between contingency and management reserves. To wrap this all together, we have to talk about the emergency cash. Because risks are things we have identified as maybes, we set aside what we call contingency reserves to handle them. But because issues often include things we never saw coming, what we call the unknown unknowns, the organization holds management reserves. In very simple terms, contingency is for the risks you put in your register. Management reserve is for the issues that jump out of the bushes and surprise you. It's like having a savings account for car repairs because you know your car might break, contingency, but also having a general emergency fund in case a giant tree falls on your roof, management reserve. As an RMP, you are the master of that contingency fund because you have mapped out the risks that justify it. You move from worry to a state of being funded and ready. So now that we have mastered the full journey from future maybes to current facts and how we fund them both, you are ready to see if you can tell them apart in the real world. And that leads us perfectly into our next exercise. We are going to discuss individual project risk in details in next chapter.